a line to create chips. The investment, it's orders of magnitude more than any other kind of manufacturing you can think of. It's not something that you make one investment and it's static. You make the investment, then the technology changes, you got to make it again. The one thing I'll say about the US government right now, by trying to repatriate it back to the US, that is a very smart move for economics, for jobs, and for national security. And I would argue the EU needs to do the same thing. The supply chain issues that everybody was talking about and how there were no cars available for the past 2-3 years,
Right.
That's changed.
In some cases.
I don't know if you saw, in some cases, exactly. I don't know if you saw, but like kind of in insider baseball, the measure for a healthy car industry is how many days supply do you have on car lots? And the general target that a car manufacturer wants to go to is 30 days. Why is 30 days important? Well, that's when the dealer has enough cars to sell, and as a result, they can actually make money. You go over 30 days, it's not the end of the world, but you just have more in the pipeline. You go under 30 days, that's when you get into what we've been dealing with over the past 2-3 years, where you don't have enough cars, and you get into the point of pricing changes, and you go on the lot and they want $5,000 over for like a Kia Seltos.
Right.
Well, now we're starting to see this very unique division, which I've never seen before. At the very bottom end of the scale, you've got Toyota. They have something like 20 or 23 days of supply. And on the other end of the scale, you have Jeep. They have 127 days of supply.
More and more vehicles are coming in. They're not being pushed out. In some cases, some of these dealerships are biting the bullet and reducing some prices.
And this is why it's important to people watching. You're seeing advertisements on TV or on the radio or online that you can get a Jeep 4xe for $7,000 off. So what's happening? Why is that the case?
You can tell a successful company when people are storming down the doors, taking everything that you bring in, and even being willing to swallow, an uptick in price. And Toyota has managed to hook in and keep people interested in their product. Everything they build pretty much is popular, and they're selling them, and they're selling them quickly. And the speed of which they sell them means that they're able to maintain profit. They're getting their supplies still, but not quite as fast as the others. And they're not building up on the lots. They're just getting them out the door, which of course means profit.
And very quick abridged version. When the pandemic first hit, all the car manufacturers changed their guidance and said, we're not going to hit our original guidance for 2020. We're going to have what we predict our sales will be. And that's not just telling Wall Street or the city. That's going to their suppliers.
Right.
So they went to their suppliers and said, sorry guys, we're not going to buy as many tires. Well, the tire guy, he's kind of screwed. He's sitting on the sideline like, oh, who's going to buy my tires? But the guy who's making the chips, he's like, are you sure? Because the guys who are making TVs, they want more chips. So I'm going to take your fab and I'm going to give that line over to the TV guy. And just know, if you come to me in like 2 months and say you want more, that line is committed for 3 years to the TVs. It would be smart for not just one manufacturer, but for all OEMs to come together and jointly create a fab. When I say a fab, it is a fabricating facility to do nothing but silicon, make chips.
Yes.
That's devoted just to the industry. No one's done this yet. And that would be, you know how governments talk about national security? Mm-hmm. I would argue that's the national security of this industry. And I would argue you need to do two things at once. You need to take the national security of your industry, but also take the supply chains out of Asia and put them in places that are closer to where the cars are manufactured, and you have more control over the manufacturing, but more importantly, you have a better relationship with the governments, even if it costs you a little more to do that. And we're already seeing that in the US.
Exactly.
The one thing I would agree the government's doing well at this point is trying to repatriate manufacturing of chips. Well, now we're at a point where chips have caught up, and so they're getting into cars like Jeeps. I would argue one of the big differences between, say, Stellantis and Toyota, Toyota is very focused on not only market, but right-sizing the volumes of the cars they're making.
Right.
So they're not saying, well, we're going to make 250,000 Corolla hatchbacks just because. They realize that we're not going to sell 250,000 hatchbacks, but we will sell 250,000 RAV4s. And that turns into a 27 or 23 day supply where Jeep might say, okay, we can get the factory up and running for the, I'll make it up, the Wrangler. And right now you have too many Wranglers, which is why you're getting all these lease incentive deals.
Toyota is capable of moving quicker. Even though they're a very big company, their ability to shift in terms of production, when they had to cut production in half, which they announced almost 2 years ago now, they did that almost immediately. It was very quick. And when they were ramping back up, that happened very fast as well. And they were able to maintain their sales. Their losses were not that dramatic compared to many others.
I don't think you're going to believe me on this. I think GM did a better job of moving their chips to the places that they would make more money on. It's kind of like Vegas. Always bet on black.
Yeah.
Most chips can work in different environments. They can work in an Escalade, they can work in a Chevy Trax. But they make $15,000 a copy on an Escalade, they make $500 a copy on a Chevrolet Trax. So General Motors was a great example of, we're going to make more Escalades, or we're going to make more Corvettes.
Or pickups.
Or more pickups. Porsche, Volkswagen Group, they weren't as smart about this for two reasons. Number one, their cars were more complex. Like, for example, in the case of the Porsche Taycan, they had to stop making them all together because the steering wheel in adjustment needed a chip.
Right.
So they had to stop making them because they realized, well, we don't have enough chips to make all the bits in a Taycan, so why don't we move those chips to Audis, which we know we can sell in volume, and when we get back up to speed, we'll start making the Taycans again. But then they couldn't get back up to speed, so they re-engineered the steering wheel to be a manual adjustment.
I did not know that.
See, this is like, I met with the guy who runs all of product. He used to run all of product for the US. Now he's the president of Mercedes Canada. And he has a great saying: be thankful for the problems you do have. Companies like Porsche, they got hit hard, not just because of chips. All of a sudden a war broke out. And you and I would have never thought that the Ukraine would impact any of these supply chain issues. Turns out the wiring harnesses impacted it.
Exactly.
Impacted Mercedes, even as far flung as Alabama, because where were they getting the wiring harnesses? From the Ukraine.
Right.
So you put all this together and it's kind of like a perfect storm, and we're starting to see these weird oddball things as supply chains catch up. Like, for example, Mercedes-Benz EQS. How much is that? The SUV.
The EQS SUV? Well, they start at what, 50?
100 grand.
100 grand. Okay, just kidding.
You start lower than that for the lesser one, but 100 grand.
Okay.
You would think that one, everybody's buying an electric car. Now everybody's buying a fancy EQS. That would stand to reason.
Right.
Turns out you can get one of those for $500 a month right now. Under certain circumstances, right deal, and all that kind of stuff. But that's a combination of supply chain, and there's an instance where the design is falling flat. People aren't excited about the design, and they're not buying the car.
Right.
So this issue that we're seeing, going back to the original point of this discussion, 127 days versus 23 days, it's not just supply chain, it's which bets did you make, and that's why we're seeing this really odd swing between these two companies.
And then you have everybody in between who have managed through certain things and have managed. I argue that Ford has done a pretty good job through the entire crisis.
I would agree.
Being able to maintain. They had to do some stops. There were some technical issues and stuff like that they had through the pandemic, and even now, everybody has a blip on the radar. But for the most part, their ability to produce product and get it out there. Yeah, guys are waiting a year or even more on a Lightning or a Bronco. That is demand. But they also have, 150,000 escapes that they're able to sell.
So what's the lesson we can take from this?
Try not to shut everything down on the next pandemic. I think that you hit it on the head earlier. If we centralize chip production in the United States. Even if not everybody wants to buy into it, because maybe, I don't know, for instance, Ford as an example, I think that they'll have their own facility up and running. If it's not up and running, it will be
They can't
soon.
afford it. And this is again my experience from being in the tech world,
Right.
to create a fab, a line to create chips, the investment, it's orders of magnitude more than any other kind of manufacturing you can think of. And it's the kind of thing that it's not something that you make one investment and it's static. You make the investment, then technology changes, you got to make it again.
Okay.
And that's why, again, the one thing I'll say about the U.S. government right now, by trying to repatriate it back to the U.S., that is a very smart move for economics, for jobs, and for national security. And I would argue the EU needs to do the same thing.
I would agree.
So I would argue this is a lesson that's not so much new because of what we've lived through with the pandemic. I think this goes back to the same issue we had in 2007 to 2009. You need to right-size your manufacturing for the business that you're trying to create. In other words, be more like Ferrari and less like Jeep, meaning Ferrari makes, of the special ones, they only make 399. They know they can sell 7,000, but they make 399. Maybe not such an extreme example, but by keeping the supply, matching it a bit more, and not creating more inventory out there, which ultimately you have to incentivize to sell, you'll have a healthier business, and you might not make as much money, but you'll consistently make money, meaning you won't be as susceptible to cycles in business.
Agreed and agreed, but there's one thing that you forgot. Dealerships do have a hand in this in terms of what they're trying to push and what they're trying to sell, and how much are they willing to be patient and sell X amount, or are they going to try to push as much product out the door as possible for the maximum amount of money possible. Dealerships, each one has a different mindset. Some of them are absolutely logical about this, and some of them are completely illogical and money hungry and don't understand long-term results of what they're starting. You know, they don't see the end of the tunnel. They're only seeing what their immediate profit's going to be. And because of that, they're ordering these vehicles, they're asking for these vehicles, and they're raking them in. And that's why you're seeing certain Stellantis products just sitting there on the lot, because they're just grabbing too much. They need to understand what their volume actually is as opposed to what they want it to be.
I'm going to share actually some very inside baseball, which I think will be interesting for the audience.
Okay.
And I'll tie in why it's important just to the regular car guy.
Right.
Mercedes-Benz just completely reorganized their sales organization. When I say sales organization, Mercedes-Benz US, and their customer is not you, their customer is the dealer. So whoever your local dealer is.
Right.
All car manufacturers do the same thing. They have regional reps that go in and sell the cars to the dealers.
Of course.
Hey, what do you need more of, and what's not selling, and what parts do you need, that kind of stuff. Mercedes changed the system where they have a tier that's focused just on like the public dealership groups, like the Penske's of the world, the Auto Nations of the world. And then they have another tier which is like the regional groups. And then they have another tier which is like the mom and pop shops, because they know the needs of the Penske is different from the needs of like the Volvo dealer that's in Northern California.
Okay.
And as a result, their efficiency has grown. And I would argue it came a little late, because now you have this problem with the EQS.
Right.
But look at how quickly they turned it around to address a problem like the EQS. And perhaps that's what other car manufacturers do, to address what you're saying is a disparity between the two sides of the retailing. Because at the end of the day, I think everybody here is going to say in the comments, well, everybody should be like Tesla. The problem is you have all these franchise laws here as well as over in Europe. That's like breaking unions.
Yeah.
Like, I'd love to do it, but the reality is, how is that going to happen?
Yeah, and agreed that if you guys are saying, yeah, Tesla has a good model, they do. But there's only so much you can do, and dealerships as a whole have their hands in everything, including certain laws that would prohibit being able to go to a complete online model with everything. Plus, it would kill their business, which does affect a community.
So if you were giving advice to Stellantis, what would you say to them to fix this problem?
That they are building too many of the wrong cars.
Like, give me an example of the wrong car.
Well, nobody's buying, or very few people are buying certain Jeep products. So focus on the Jeep products they are buying. Nobody's buying Chrysler except for all two vehicles that they have. That it's about to become one. They're not showing what they're able to do. They're just showing little hints of it, and people are no longer interested in buying such dated vehicles. Look at almost everything they build. Their platforms are extremely dated, and that's something that nobody else is really dealing with. Not to the volume that Stellantis is trying to build at. So I think in their case, they need to slow things down, bring their new product out here immediately, get it out on the streets, and it not being something like the Dodge Hornet, which was a mistake.
You drove it. I mean, I didn't drive it, but I would agree it's a major mistake.
It's a major mistake.
It
has
it's
potential.
The third flavor of the same car, and the pricing isn't different enough. They should have just made the one, and that's it.
Yes, I agree.
I would pick up on what you're saying. I would go to Stellantis. Stellantis has an unusual problem in that they piece together too many disparate brands that shouldn't be in existence.
Yep.
And the reason why they're in existence is because too many governments have their hands in the business to create jobs. And they need to have, sadly, the reckoning of, we can't continue like this. They need to shed some brands and probably shed some manufacturing capacity.
I would agree.
I think that would solve the problem.
That's exactly it. Condense it, make your vehicles that are higher quality at a lower volume, and I think that would actually help. But it'll be teething pains along the way. It's going to hurt.
So you're kind of like Jerry Maguire, so less clients, better service.
Exactly.
But Renee Zellweger is not going to be your wife.
I don't like her anyway.
Oh, she's super hot. Super hot.
Okay,
Okay, so what's the advice you'd give Toyota?
don't hire Renee Zellweger. No. Well, Toyota doesn't really need any advice.
They don't.
Jeez, they're on the ball. I hate to be such a fanboy because there are other automakers out there that I think build a superior product, but Toyota is quite good in what they do. They're smart about it. They understand their return on their investment, and I think they understand their clientele, both with the dealership and Joe Public. So there's nothing
I would add
say.
to that, and granted, people are going to say I'm biased because I own a Toyota product, but Toyota, the proof that they are doing the right thing is they have the most money in the bank out of all car manufacturers, bar none. Like GM, I think, has like 20 billion in the bank. Toyota's got like 50. And the retort, anybody that kind of can read a financial statement will say, well, Toyota has all this debt. Toyota has way more revenue than anybody else.
Yeah.
That's why they have the debt levels they do, not to the point where it's not a thing where it's like the U.S. government where we're completely bankrupt.
Well, what would you do to solve Toyota's problem and Stellantis' problem? Because they're two separate problems, but they're on the same balance beam. They're on the same scale. It's just a very, very tilted
One
scale.
can't meet demand, the other one has too much supply. What would you do?
Yeah, exactly.
I would add to that, which system do you prefer? The oversupply where you try to get these deals every 3-4 years, or would you rather see an overall healthier industry, and what does that healthier industry look like?
It's a hell of a question.
Let us know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoMan TV, all word, MotoMan TV on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And once again, a huge thank you to Nancy and Lyman, who are massive car guys.
Yeah.
And they actually have a Jeep.
Yes, they do. Yeah. And a Toyota.
Yes, they own a Toyota.
Yeah,
They do own a Toyota, yes.
So there you go.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us, guys. And please leave your comments below. I will be jumping in there, so will MotoMan, and we'll be answering a few questions if you have them.
And where can they find you?
alltfl.com or on one of our 8 channels at TFL Studios, TFL Car, TFL Truck, all of those other ones.
Until we see you in the next episode, bish beta.